How can you be in a relationship over many, many months and not know someone's real name? He also said his parents had died in a plane crash, and when she Googled a plane crash when she first heard the story, she discovered she couldn't find anything about this story, but she didn't question him because she wanted to believe. She says, as my chest tightened and my stomach twisted, I watched Max Tavita, the man I loved, being arrested on my phone, but I had absolutely no idea why. Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist based in private practice in Harley Street in London in the United Kingdom. I want to talk today about romance scamming. This is when people get swindled out of a large sum of money because they met someone on a dating app or via a dating website or just met them via the internet, develop a romantic relationship which is basically used to exploit someone and extract money from them. It's called a romance scam. But the reason I want to talk about it, I think there are several psychological red flags that if you're aware of them can help protect you from being scammed by someone who's out to swindle you. But there's also a wider sense in which romance scamming could be the case whereby you don't lose money, but you invest in someone emotionally or psychologically and discover, often very late in the day, that actually you've been investing in the wrong person. There's a very similar psychology to the psychology of a financial romance scam, as in the psychology of being deceived into thinking what you were falling in love with turns out in reality to be very different from what you thought was going on. So to illustrate the point, I want to read a story that was published in the Daily Telegraph newspaper here in the UK recently from an actual romance scammer. And as I read it out, I'm going to point out bits where there were red flags that this poor victim seemed unable to see in order to assist you to help protect you from being scammed in a romantic sense. Not just in a financial sense of being scammed, but also in an emotional sense. So the headline of the article is, I lost £150,000 to a romance scammer. When Tracy Hall fell in love with Max Tavita and transferred money to him, she had no idea he was a serial fraudster's latest victim. So if you just start with the sum of money, £150,000 is a large sum of money. The way romance scamming works is people don't ask you for that large sum of money up front on a second or third date. As we'll discover, in fact, this man waited about 6 months into the relationship. This is classic romance scamming, before asking for a small sum of money in which he said he was going to invest on her behalf. And it always starts with a small sum of money, and then another sum of money, then another sum of money, and it accumulates into a very large sum of money indeed. So, if the £150,000 had been asked straight up very early on in the relationship, she would have spotted the fact this was a romance scam. So length of time into the relationship, 6 months in this case, plus asking for small sums bit by bit, these are also red flags, but they're reasons why people don't spot the romance scam. So the article goes on about when she first saw the video that kind of like the scales dropped from her eyes. It ended, it says, with a video that almost destroyed her life, talking about a very busy, hectic day for this single mother. She says, as my chest tightened and my stomach twisted, I watched Max Tavita, the man I loved, being arrested on my phone, but I had absolutely no idea why. Desperately trying to control her panic, Tracy, at the time 41 and living in Sydney, Australia, called the police. Incredulity turned to horror as she heard that his name wasn't Max, that he was under investigation, and that they were unable to share anything more. Suddenly I was struggling to breathe. What was Max's real name? Why was he being investigated? And then finally a question that made my legs buckle beneath me. What did this mean for my money? So let's go back to the fact that in fact she discovers she didn't even know the guy's real name. How can you be in a relationship over many, many months and not know someone's real name? But as we'll see, for example, one red flag was this man paid with cash, £3,900 or something around that level for a romantic weekend away. When people pay with cash, that may be a red flag, particularly large sums of money. Why are they not carrying credit cards? Is that because they're not really being honest with you about what their name actually is. What we discover is that this woman didn't meet any of this man's friends, not really, or if she met them, it was only briefly. And his story was he just returned from a many years trip in New York where he was working in America. And again, that explains why there was no background to this man, why she never met his friends. He also said his parents had died in a plane crash. And when she Googled the plane crash, when she first heard the story, she discovered she couldn't find anything about this story. But she didn't question him because she wanted to believe. And it's that emotional need, that strong emotional need, she was a year after a divorce, that actually explains why love is blind and why romance scamming is such a profitable business for some people. So the article goes on. The smart, educated and capable woman was about to discover that she'd been the victim of a massive financial fraud manipulated by a man who had stolen millions and ruined the lives of men and women across the world. The fact that he could do it repeatedly tells you there's a very strong pattern here. And he's following the rules of a game that can be financially very, very beneficial to these scam artists. But they're following the rules of attraction, for example, and that's why it's important to be aware that some people are out there are playing this game so you can spot it and protect yourself. So the headline is funny and charming. In 2016, a year after her marriage had ended, Tracy wrote her dating profile for an app. I bet she may have mentioned something about her marriage had ended recently. And again, these scam artists are on the lookout for people whose relationship has ended recently because they realize these people are more emotionally vulnerable. I loved my corporate job at eBay and was juggling my career with looking after my daughter, Asha, then 5, she remembers. I wasn't looking to be swept off my feet. I was just hoping to find someone nice to hang out with. But if she put on her dating profile that she loved her job, she was juggling her career and looking after her daughter, age 5, she's sending a message to scam artists that she's too busy to date. And therefore they know she's vulnerable because she's probably a bit lonely and is finding it difficult to connect with men who will have the time and patience to fit in with her busy life. And that, again, is a red flag for her to be aware of, not to send out these signals on dating apps, because these scam artists will be on the lookout for these signs. Even with low expectations, the experience wasn't what Tracy had hoped for, describing the dating pool as more like a puddle. So again, a clue to possible emotional need and maybe even desperation after a while in this poor woman. Then she spotted the profile of Max Tavita, a 41-year-old blonde triathlete and financial advisor. After swiping right, their messages flew back and forth, with Tracy pleasantly surprised by this funny, charming man back in Sydney after 16 years in New York. Another red flag. A story. I spent 16 years in New York. That's why I don't have any friends locally. That's why it looks like I'm a stranger in the place where you are. Look for this kind of backstory that explains why you will never meet people who are close to the scam artist, because by definition you then really know the person. This comes down to what it means to know someone. This woman goes on and on about many emotionally bonding experiences she had with this man, an intimate moment she shared, and she used that as a signal to her that she was in a deep, trusting relationship. That's not the correct signal. The correct signal is when someone is sharing their life with you and that they have a life to share. They have hobbies, they have interests, they have friends, they have relatives, they have stuff they do that you can take part in, share in a life, and that person has to have a life. Scam artists won't have a life, they won't have friends that you will meet or relatives or parents, because they're scam artists, they're scamming you. Therefore, they're pretending to be someone they aren't. On their first phone call, Max revealed something shocking. When I asked about his family, he said that his parents had died in a plane crash when he was 6. While I was shocked and struggled to know how to reply, he remained thoughtful and positive. In bed that night, Tracy Googled Tavita plane crash. It was odd, she noted, that nothing came up. Tracy falls quiet for a moment as she reflects back on that moment. At the time, the very last word I'd used to describe myself was vulnerable. We think of vulnerable women as being an emotional mess or being desperate for love. I was neither. Another red flag. We're all vulnerable. The fact that she refused to consider the fact that she was vulnerable is not a good sign. We're all vulnerable. They're all things that we tend to turn a blind eye to what the truth might be as we pursue some fantasy. So that's another key point. So fundamentally, we're all vulnerable to be scammed by these romance artists, scam artists. The final point I want to make is that this man said that I can invest money for you, and she handed money to him. If he was giving her investment advice, like buy stocks in a particular oil company, she was handing her money to a stockbroker or to a website that traded in those stocks. Another red flag was he was meant to be helping her with investment advice, and she transferred the money directly to him. That is a very ominous sign. Anyone who is a very good investment advisor will have a track record that you can check independently, and she never did that. She was getting confused by what she sees in romantic comedy films, where there are a lot of close, intimate, personal moments. She was getting confused that that was a signal that something deep and meaningful was occurring between these two people, when what I'm arguing is what is really deep and meaningful is when someone shares their life with you. You take part in their life, and they have a life worth sharing. If you follow these red flags I've signaled, I am confident that you will not fall victim to a romance scam.